Hello and welcome to the Nerd Attic Archive. Today we're going to be looking at the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. The ZX Spectrum, or the Speccy as it's fondly known as, is where my story in computers starts. So to tell this story properly we'll have to go back in time a little bit, way back to 1982. Yes, that's how old I am. I was 12 at the time and I'd just started high school. So one day during physics, in a lesson with Mr. Sumley, our physics teacher, he announced that the school had just bought a new computer, and it was the ZX Spectrum. He asked if anybody wanted to have a look at it at the end of the lesson, but would stay back and have a little shot. He then pulled it out and loaded Manic Miner, and that was it. I was hooked. So that night after school, I ran home, begged me mum and dad to buy us one, which the answer was no, as it was £175. That today is probably in the region of, if I had to guess, some over £500, and we just couldn't afford it. So I was feeling sorry for myself, and my nana, who was an absolute legend, basically said if I got a paper job, she would buy me the Spectrum through the catalogue, and I would pay her half of it every week. Well, that was it. I grabbed the first paper job I could get, and I got myself a Spectrum. So when it originally launched in '82, there was two versions. There was the 16K version and the 48K version. You could literally upgrade the 16K to 48, but it meant getting the old soldering iron out, and as a boy of 12, if it's such an expensive thing, there was no way I was going to do that, so we went for the 48K, as most of the games were 48K, all the good ones were at the time anyway. So it came with 48K and also a Zilog Z80 CPU, which was the powerhouse of its time. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the specs of the computer. There's many videos out there, most people know what it could and couldn't do. The famous things were the rubber keys. You've also got, you know, the colour clash, which was a massive issue. The audio wasn't the best. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, computers were new, it was a new thing, and getting people in at £175 was a miracle, you know. And more importantly, this is what started the boom of games, bedroom gamers. Guys like yourself at the time get a little computer and think, well, I'm going to write a game. And this is what launched careers of many people. You've got the Oliver Twins, you've got Matthew Smith who did Manic Miner, you know, Oliver Twins did all the Dizzy games. These were just young kids, you know, kids who were at the same age as me at school, who literally just sat down and coded away and got their heads around it. I must admit, I couldn't get my head around it. It was a gobbledygook to me, but I used to love just going through magazines and inputting all the programs, and most of the time they didn't work, but then, you know, going through it, making sure, and then when you got it working, what a buzzing feeling. It was fantastic. Now, according to Wikipedia, there was 1,728 games published for the ZX Spectrum, which is a mountain of software. So anybody who wants to get back into a Spectrum now, it's a fantastic time. The hardware's getting old. Yes, you're going to have problems. Membranes literally just rot away, but they all can be replaced. And membranes, 15-20 quid. It's not a massive job to put it in, but anyway, that's getting ahead of myself. So after the success of the ZX Spectrum 16K and 48K came the Spectrum Plus. Now, I remember one of my friends at school was saving up and doing everything Celtic Spectrum just to get a Spectrum Plus, and the disappointment when he realised it was literally a 48K Spectrum in a new hard case with a non-rubber keyboard. It was a bit of a con, to be honest. So that was 1984. A year later was when we saw the real big step forward, which was the ZX Spectrum 128. Now, it looked just like a Spectrum Plus, but it had what's fondly known as the toaster heatsink on the side of the case. This computer literally had 128K, was codenamed Derby at the time, and this was more of a successful launch. On top of the 128K, the machine also came with a new 3-channel audio chip. Now, it also got rid of the internal speaker, thank the Lord, and the sound actually came through the TV, which was a massive leap forward. So now we jump forward another year, and this is when things really change for the Spectrum. Basically, Sir Clive decides that he wants to concentrate on his little C5 car, and he needs funds. So he decides to sell the whole company to Amstrad. And Amstrad launched the ZX Spectrum Plus 2. Now this computer had a proper keyboard, it had a tape deck built in, it was originally in a light grey colour. Also the power supply, which was grey, was a direct copy of the ZX Spectrum Plus and 128 power supplies. Now a year later, they decided to launch the Plus 2A and the Plus 3. Now the Plus 2A was pretty much a cloned version of the Plus 2. A few minor changes to some of the chips inside, but mainly you can tell a Plus 2A by the colour. It's black, not grey. The Plus 3 is a different beast altogether. What they did with the Plus 3 is they got rid of the tape deck and went for an FTD drive, which is the same 3.5-inch floppy drive that's available in the Amstrad CPC 6128. Now these are interchangeable as well, so if you ever have a Plus 3 with a failed drive and you can get your hands on a CPC one, it works. They're actually identical. You can interchange through. That's just a tip for you. In the future I'll be doing a video on how to repair one of these, because over time, just like everything else that's rubber, the drive belts disintegrate. Now it's about $150 for a new drive belt. It's a little bit fiddly to do, but I'll do a full video showing you how to do that if you want to get one back up and running. The biggest problem with Plus 3s is that most people don't realise it has a different power supply to the Plus 2. It needs extra juice for that FTD drive. So if you put a Plus 2 power supply in, the machine will boot up and it'll work fine, but it won't access the drive properly. So a lot of people think if they're using third-party power supplies that the drive's broke. 9 out of 10 times there's nothing wrong with the drive, it's just not getting enough power supply. In 1992, Amstrad basically decided to stop production of the Spectrum, and that was it. All done and dusted, game over, or so we thought. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of clones made. These were mainly Russian, Romanian, Czechoslovakia computers. They're all based on the original Spectrum and the Plus 2s. We'll not go into them because you can make a whole video on them on their own. I mean, it's really interesting how they did it. But basically, the Spectrum lay dormant for a while, and until the launch of the Sam Coupe, which was a computer made by Miles Gordon Technologies in Swansea. And basically, what it was a machine that was made to emulate a 48K Spectrum. You don't see many of these around. They never really took off. The ones you do see are basically in people's collections, and they're very rarely used. And after that, it just fizzled out. And until recently, and this is where things start getting really interesting. With the advent of FPGA technology, which is basically, in a nutshell, a chip that can be programmed internally to emulate other chips. So you can actually build a computer inside of a chip. It's not really emulation, but it is as well. It's definitely not software emulation. It's hardware reconfiguration of a chip. And some guys got together from Brazil and started the Spectrum Next. It's had 2 Kickstarters, and the machine is going from strength to strength. It's a fantastic little piece of, and very clever how they did it as well. They actually contacted the guy who originally designed the Spectrum, and he did a new case for the Spectrum Next. And unfortunately, sadly, he passed away before the case was shown in the flesh in a working machine. But it is a thing of beauty. These are getting harder and harder to get a hold of. The 2 Kickstarters have sold out. There's rumours they'll do a 3rd Kickstarter, but all is not lost. A company has brought out a clone board called the Ngo, and it is identical to the Next. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with a case or a keyboard, but it can go inside an original Spectrum or Spectrum Plus case. Now, I've just gotten one, and I don't want to destroy a piece of hardware that still works, taking out the original board. I'd rather keep that as it is. So I'm in the process of putting together a machine of my own. I don't want a small keyboard. I want a nice full-size keyboard because I want to program on it. So I'll be unveiling that on the channel, and also doing a little video on how I've put it together and how I've done what I've done and made it. And it's a cheap board. It's literally £110. It gets you the full board and does everything the Spectrum Next does. And all you need to do is plug a PS2 keyboard in, connect it to HDMI or RGB, and that's it. Away you go. Everything runs off micro SD cards. It actually accelerates from the original 3 MHz up to 28 MHz. So some of the original games like Driller, which ran like a pig, actually run too fast to play now. So I think it's 3, 7, 14 and 28 MHz that it runs at. I'll do a full video on the NGO and Spectrum Next in the future. Now, because there were so many games made for the Spectrum, it's very unfair to say this is the best 10 games of all time. So to finish the video off, I've picked my favourite 10 games of the Spectrum. This is not saying that these are the best of all time. These are just my personal favourites from when I was a lad and I had a Spectrum. And what I'll do is I'll make a little combination of live gameplay, etc. of me playing these games now. And to make it nice and easy for capture, I'm going to actually do it from the Spectrum Next. Now, in the above picture here, I'll quickly show you. This is my Sinclair Shrine, if you want to call it. These are my original 48K Spectrum, my Spectrum Plus 2, my Spectrum Plus 3, even my ZX81. All these machines run, I keep them up to speed, but I don't like using the vintage hardware, as you know, these things are old and they don't last forever, so they're literally in a stored, displayed environment. And this is what's great about the Spectrum Next. For not a lot of money, you can have a super fast Spectrum, easy to use, and it's an absolute dream to program on. And that's what I'm doing at the minute. So please enjoy the next 10 clips, starting with the game that got me into it all, Manic Miner. So here it is, Manic Miner, made by one little kid in his bedroom. It's 20 levels of Miner Willie trying to get some keys before the air runs out to escape. It's just a classic game. It really is. It's one of the best platformers still to this day. I'm not a massive platformer fan, but I love this. Second game. It's a sequel. A lot of people love Jetpack, but I actually preferred Lunar Jetman, which was the sequel. And basically the little guy is the same. As you can see, he flies around shooting his gun as he does, but he can also jump in the car. And there's just a bit more depth to it. I remember getting into one of the things I will say, I was never very good at these games. And as you can see, I'm still not particularly good. I can't remember how you get the car over the gaps in the ground. But, you know, it is what it is. So, game 3. Oh, what a classic this was. Dilly Thompson's Decathlon. Just brings back so many memories, just playing against my friends, destroying joysticks. It was like an arcade to us in the day. It just played really, really well. The sound effects are atrocious. There's no music or anything. Look around, man. The animations, legend. So game 4, Ant Attack. I never, as a kid, worked out what I was supposed to be doing this. I just used to love walking around and exploring, trying to kill the ants. More of a sort of side note, I think I pretty could argue this is probably the first isometric game that was ever made for console or home computer. It was light years before its time, and to be honest, if you use the Spectrum Next and boost the speed up, it's much more playable. Oh, next, Saber Wolf. Ultimate Player the game, basically changed into Rare as we know it today. Every game they made was pretty perfect, to be fair. And this was brilliant. It was just excellent maze game. Wow, listen to that music. It's a legend. So next is Ghostbusters. Just because it was a lot of firsts for me, it blew me away that the fact it could actually say Ghostbusters and because of digitized laughter. The game was pretty rubbish, to be fair, but you know, I loved it as a kid. I need to sit and play these more because it's been a long time since I've played these games. I'm always mucking around with the systems. It's very rare I get down to sit and play them. So this was basically, you know, you went to the map, you drove around in your little car, you could suck up ghosts, you upgraded the car, you got to the hotels or wherever the ghosts were there, and then you had to go into a different type of gameplay where you laid a trap and you had to try and get the ghost in between your streams of your light packs. Here he is there. Oh wow, look at that. These were just great in the day, they really were. Oh, if you cross the streams, which I know I'm going to do in a second. That was it, that was game over. And it was like reverse joystick, so if you were pushing right, you had to push left, left was right. And if you tapped, that's it. I crossed the streams, wow. Next up, oh, Lotus Astray. Now this was a first because me and my mates used to play this all the time because it was 2-player split screen, which was, you know, wow. And as you notice, some of the companies who are making these games not one name people anymore, or a couple of lads, it's companies. So Magnetic Fields were pretty good at what they did. Right, Nightlaw, wow. This was a game and a half. I spent hours on this thing. So your little guy who changes, he's like an explorer guy, there he is. It's full 3D environment. You have to go around, and what happens is, you'll see in a second, he'll change into a werewolf. See how the sun's moving at the bottom? When that goes to night, he transforms into a werewolf, which is, it's great. But I used to sit for hours trying to make maps of Saberwolf and this, trying to work out where I was. And you used to get them in magazines. Now, I've put these last two games in because this should be a lesson. This is Airwolf by Elite. I got this for Christmas because I loved Airwolf at the time, and I never read the reviews, but I banged on at my parents for it and they got us it. And because I banged on so much, I told them it was great. It was horrendous. It was so hard. You know, getting past this bit was so frustrating because watch, you get the hole, you're just about to fly through, and it rebuilds it back up because there's a time limit. Then, as a surprise, next Christmas, I get Airwolf 2. Oh dear, I should have told them I hated the game, but oh no, this is even worse. It was a bit more playable, to be fair, but I'm sure, I can't remember now, but I'm sure one of them wasn't. I'm sure it was Airwolf 1, you couldn't finish. There was a bug in it, you just couldn't complete it. But there you go, there's my top 10, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, guys. This is the first archive video I've done. Next up will be the Commodore 64. I look forward to doing it and hope to see you soon. Please like, subscribe, and help the channel grow. Thank you very much.